The day I turned 73, my own son looked at me in front of everyone and said, his voice cold and almost mocking, "You're just a useless old man, Dad. You shouldn't even be here." In that moment, nobody said a thing. Nobody defended me. Not my daughter-in-law, not my grandchildren, not my other two kids. They all just stood there in silence, as if what he said was true, as if I really was just a burden in their lives. I was holding a plate in my hand, still warm with a slice of cake I had bought myself the day before because nobody else remembered to get one. And right there, standing in the middle of the yard of the house I built with my own two calloused hands, I understood everything. I understood that to them I was nothing more than a weight. In that instant, something inside me broke, but something else woke up. So do one thing. Listen to this story until the end, because what happened the next day will surprise you, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Then tell me what part hit you the hardest, and also tell me what city are you listening from. My name is Thomas Miller. I was born in a small town in the Midwest, in a humble little house made of wood and clay. I worked my entire life in construction. I started at the bottom, shoveling mix for the older masons. Then I started learning. Columns, foundations, roofs. I built schools, city halls, rich people's houses. But the one that gave me the most pride was my own, the one where my son now lives with his wife and kids. I built that house myself, brick by brick, with no architect, no bank loan, just with hard work and faith. I married young. Lucy was my life partner, the strongest and sweetest woman I've ever known. We had 3 children, Ernest, Ryan, and Claire. When Lucy got sick, I was with her every single day. Baths, medicine, food, affection. I never stopped taking care of her. Even when she no longer recognized me, I was still there holding her hand. When she passed, a piece of me went with her. And you know what I thought? That after all that, my children would take care of me. That they would see me as an example of love. But over time, everything changed. Ryan, the oldest, became a cold man, all logic with no memory in his heart. He always wanted to feel superior to his father. He got a business degree, married a city woman, bought a new car. And they started looking at me like I was old-fashioned obsolete. First, it was the disguised comments. "Dad, don't do that anymore. Let the young people handle it." Then the invitations that stopped coming. And finally that phrase on my birthday, "Useless old man." That night after the party, nobody said a proper goodbye. I sat on the patio for a while listening to the crickets and looking at the sky, thinking about Lucy. You know, some silences scream, and the silence of that night told me everything. You don't belong here anymore. But they forgot one little detail. I may be old, but I'm no fool. I may be tired, but I'm not weak. I've never been one to play the victim. So the next day, very early, I got up. I had my coffee in silence. I put on my blue shirt. The one Lucy used to say matched my eyes. I grabbed my black briefcase and went to my lawyer's office. Inside that briefcase, there was more than just papers. There was everything I had never told anyone. Ryan thought that house was his just because he lived there with his family. He never read the deed. He never bothered to find out whose name the property was under. And he certainly had no idea what I had saved in a bank in an account that not even my other children knew about. Look, I'm not a man of luxury, but I'm not naive either. Since I retired, I had been saving in silence month after month. It wasn't much at first, but over time, with interest, it grew into a nice sum. And the best part, it's all in my name. At the law office, I asked for a consultation with a young, smart lawyer who listened to me with respect. I told him everything. I showed him the papers and I said calmly, "I want to make everything crystal clear. I want to change my will, and I want to set specific conditions." He smiled a little surprised and asked me, "Are you sure, Mr. Miller?" I looked him in the eye and said, "More sure than ever." When I left, I sat on a bench in the downtown square, took a deep breath, and watched people pass by. Kids laughing, vendors shouting, a couple arguing, old folks walking slowly. And I thought, the world keeps spinning, even if they call you useless. But the decision you make after being hurt is what defines whether you stay on your feet or on your knees. And right there on that bench, I decided it was time for justice. Not revenge justice. Ryan had to understand that you don't step on your father and forget him. It's not about the money, it's about respect. And if he didn't know how to give it when I was silent, then now he was going to have to learn the hard way. But what happened that same week was faster than I imagined. And when he found out what I had done, Ryan was never good with surprises, especially when they weren't under his control. I knew he was proud, that he liked to be in charge, to feel like everything was in his hands. So when that certified letter arrived at the house where he lived, the same house he thought was his, I could picture it perfectly, his face twisting with rage. The letter was clear, no beating around the bush. It informed him that by decision of the legal owner of the property, their living arrangement was revoked, and that within 30 calendar days, the resident family had to voluntarily vacate the property. Failure to do so would result in legal action. Signed by me, Mr. Thomas Miller. I could have gone to talk to him face to face. I could have made a scene the day after the party. But no. I wanted him to feel for a few days the same silence I felt that night on the patio. The same emptiness. The same coldness of knowing you've been forgotten by the ones you love most. I wanted him to have time to think. Because sometimes only pain awakens the conscience. 2 days after receiving the letter, he called me. But it wasn't a calm call, no. It was an attack. As soon as I answered, he was already yelling. "What is this, Dad? Have you gone crazy? You want to throw us out on the street? This is my house." I let him scream. I stayed silent until he wore himself out. And when he fell quiet, breathing heavily on the other end of the line, I answered slowly with a firm voice. "Ryan, you told me I didn't belong there anymore. That I was a useless old man. Well, now I've decided to do something useful with my life. Reclaim my dignity." He was speechless. The call ended shortly after. The next day, he showed up at my house. Alone. Without his wife, without his kids. And you know what's funny? For the first time in many years, he knocked on the door before entering. I opened it calmly. I looked him in the eye, and I saw it. Fear. Not anger. Not pride. Fear. The kind of fear you see in someone who knows they've crossed the line. He came in and sat down. He stared at the floor in silence for a long time. Then he started. "Dad, I didn't mean to say that the other day. I was stressed. I'd been drinking. It was a joke." I let him talk, but every word that came out of his mouth reminded me of the pain of that night. When he finished, I took a deep breath, and I told him with respect, but without lowering my head. "Ryan, but I've heard the same thing many times. Apologies with excuses, empty words. But respect, you don't beg for it. You show it. And you had plenty of opportunities." He tried to argue. He even cried. He said he would change. That his kids loved me. That he didn't want to leave the house where his children grew up. But I was firm. I explained that the 30-day deadline still stood, and that after that, the lawyers would take over. He left with his shoulders slumped, like a child after a good lesson. And I closed the door with a light heart, because sometimes doing the right thing hurts. but it sets you free. That same week, many people in the family found out. Claire, my youngest daughter, called me crying, asking why I had done that. I tried to explain, but she didn't understand. She told me I was being radical, that I should have talked it over as a family. And I asked her, and you? Where were you when they called me a useless old man? And nobody said a thing. She didn't know what to answer. The call ended with her saying, "Dad, I don't want to lose you." And I told her, then don't lose me now that I've decided not to lose myself. The days went by, and with them a peace began to grow inside me. For the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully, knowing that even if the world out there thought I was too old to make decisions, I was still the master of my own destiny. But what I didn't expect was what Ryan was going to do next. Because in his desperation not to lose his comfort, he was capable of taking a step I never imagined. A low, cowardly, dangerous step. And that's when I realized the war had just begun. I thought Ryan had already hit rock bottom, that after seeing my firmness, he would bow his head, apologize for real, and start from scratch. But no. Pride is like a blindfold, and some people would rather crash 1,000 times than take it off. The following week, I got a call from the bank. A very kind young woman told me there had been an unusual access attempt on my account. Someone had tried to log in using my details, but the password was blocked after several failed attempts. When I confirmed it wasn't me, she paused for a few seconds. And then she asked, "Do you have relatives with access to your personal documents, Mr. Miller?" And I knew right then. That same night, I received another surprise. An officer knocked on my door with a notice in his hand. Ryan had hired a lawyer and was trying to dispute ownership of the house. He claimed there was a verbal agreement of donation, that I had given him the house as a gift. A lie. He knew perfectly well there was no paper, no contract, nothing to back that up. But the problem is, he was counting on chaos. He wanted to wear me down, push me to the limit, tire me out with paperwork. And that's where many people give up. But me, I already knew that game. My whole life I faced architects who wanted to take advantage of me on the job, bosses who wanted to cut my pay. I knew how people operated when they wanted to manipulate. And this time I was ready. I went to my lawyer, brought him all my papers, my copies, my records, and I asked for something more. That we open a formal investigation for attempted fraud and illegal access to my bank account. Because now it wasn't just about pride. It was about a crime. The days passed, and Ryan started to apply pressure. He called me, texted me, said I was destroying the family, that his children were sad, that they were going to make this all public, that he would leave me shamed in front of everyone. I read every message, and I thought, that's not my son. Or maybe he always was, and I just didn't want to see it. Deep down, what hurts a father most isn't the betrayal. It's realizing it wasn't a mistake. It was a decision repeated conscious cold. But God has his ways. Just when I thought I was alone in this fight, something happened. An old friend of mine, Matthew, who was a lawyer for over 30 years in the region, heard about everything and showed up at my house unannounced with a folder in his hand. He said, "Thomas, I heard what's happening and I think this might help you." Inside the folder were old signed and sealed copies of the original purchase contract for the land the house was on. An old document with a date with witnesses and something else, an updated deed from 5 years ago with my name as the sole owner. Matthew had kept these copies as a precaution and only just remembered them. It was as if destiny was telling me, you are not alone. With that in hand, I went back to the lawyer and we reinforced the complaint. Now it wasn't Ryan trying to prove something. It was me with solid evidence proving his bad faith. We filed a formal complaint for attempted fraud, data breach, and false declaration. The lawyer looked at me seriously and said, "Mr. Miller, with this, your son could end up with a criminal record." I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I replied, "That's not what I want. But if he chose this path, he'll have to face it like a man." And there everything started to change. Ryan received the notice from the court, and suddenly the lion became a mouse. He went to the lawyer's office with his head down, saying he wanted to reach an agreement, that it was all a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The prosecutor's office was already involved. And one thing I've learned: justice that is interrupted by pity becomes injustice for the just. That night, I sat on the patio again. The sky was clear, and the breeze carried the scent of the flowers Lucy loved so much. And I started to think, how did we get here? How can a father end up legally facing his own son? The answer came quietly from the heart. When love is crushed by selfishness, only courage remains. But what I didn't know is that this process was going to uncover something even deeper. Because during the investigation, they discovered something I never even imagined. And that would change everything. I never imagined that this investigation, which started only as a fair defense of what was mine, would uncover something that would break my soul. A week after Ryan received the court summons, my lawyer called and said he needed to see me in person. I went early as always, with my folder under my arm and a tight knot in my stomach. He greeted me with a serious face, but it wasn't anger or legal concern. It was something else, as if what he had to tell me wasn't just professional, but personal. I sat down across from him, and he said slowly, "Mr. Miller, in reviewing the bank transactions and documents signed in your name, something sensitive came up." I raised an eyebrow, confused, and he continued, "There was an attempt to forge your signature on a request to transfer your savings account to another person's name." I was silent. I didn't quite understand. Then he showed me the paper. It was a bank form with my name, my account number, and a signature that tried to look like mine. But it wasn't. I knew it instantly. And the hardest part, the beneficiary's name listed there was not Ryan's. It was his wife's. I stared at that document for a long time. I didn't speak. I just felt my chest tighten. Not only did he want to kick me out of my own house, they had also tried to empty my account. And the worst part, they didn't even dare to do it in his own name. They used his wife as a shield, as if I were some foolish old man who wouldn't notice anything. The lawyer told me the prosecutor's office was already aware that this could aggravate the case, that it was no longer a civil matter, but a criminal one. Fraud, identity theft, attempted swindling, all of it. I nodded, but inside I didn't know if I wanted to scream or cry. How did we get to this? At what point did my son become someone capable of stealing from his own father? I left that office older than ever. I walked through the square like a ghost. I sat on the same bench where weeks ago I had decided to reclaim my dignity. And there I felt defeated. Not out of fear, but out of pain. Because it's one thing to fight for justice, but it's another to discover that the person you raised with so much love has been digging your emotional grave for years without you noticing. I spent the night sleepless. I tossed and turned in bed. I stared at the ceiling, remembering when Ryan was little, when he would grab my hand to cross the street, when he would say, "Dad, don't go, Mom," every time I left for work. Where did that boy go? At what turn in the road did I lose him? Or worse, was I the one who pushed him away without realizing it? At dawn, I rose with a decision in my soul. I went to the bank. I asked them to close all the accounts. I changed the signatures, the digital access, everything. I opened a new account at another branch far away in another city. everything in my name. And a portion of that money I took out in cash, because now more than ever, I understood that my peace would not depend on papers or promises. That same afternoon, I got a voice message. It was Ryan. His voice sounded tense, choppy. He told me to forgive him, that it had been a bad moment, that his wife only wanted to help him organize the family finances. He begged me to please not proceed with the complaint, to think of the grandchildren, that all this could be settled as a family. I listened to the entire message, and at the end I deleted it, without replying. Because family isn't who calls you when they need something. It's who respects you even when you disagree. And he had already crossed that line many times. That night I made my coffee as usual. I sat on the patio. I looked at the star-filled sky. And I thought sometimes God allows masks to fall. Not so that one may hate, but so that one may be set free. But what was to come in the following days would change the course of everything. Because justice, when it walks, can be slow. But when it arrives with full force. I knew that once the legal system was activated, there was no turning back. Many people think that reporting a son is something you do in cold blood, with anger or a thirst for revenge. But no. There is nothing more draining than having to defend yourself against someone you taught how to walk. Every call from the lawyer, every document I had to sign, every new piece of evidence that came to light. It was like tearing out pieces of my heart with my own hands. But I also knew that if I didn't do it, if I let it go out of pity or fear, then I would end my final years feeling like a shadow in my own story. And I was not going to allow that. A few days later, the prosecutor summoned me to give a formal statement. I arrived at the DA's office with firm steps but a tight chest. The hallway smelled of dampness, old papers, and reheated coffee. They sat me in an office with a metal table, a desk piled with folders, and a computer that clacked with every keystroke. They asked me everything. Dates, names, situations. I answered calmly. I had nothing to hide. But when they put the forged form in front of me and asked if I recognized the signature as mine, I felt a pang in my stomach. I said out loud, "No, that is not my signature, and it pains me to say it, but I do recognize the name of the person who put it there." When I finished my statement, the prosecutor looked at me for a few seconds. Then he said, "Mr. Miller, it's not common for someone your age to have the courage to do this, but what you are doing is just." I nodded and replied, "I didn't come here to seek jail time for my son. I came to get my name and my peace back." And I held on to that until the end. The following week, I got a call from the court. They told me the judge had issued a temporary restraining order, that while the process lasted, Ryan could not approach me or communicate with me directly. That left me in shock because even though he hadn't spoken to me for weeks, knowing that an official paper forbade it was like seeing in ink what was already written in my soul, that something between us had broken, and perhaps it could no longer be fixed. But life doesn't stop. And while all this was happening, I went on with my days. I got up early, made my breakfast, read the newspaper, walked around the neighborhood. Some neighbors greeted me with pity, others with respect. Some murmured things I couldn't quite understand. But I no longer hung my head because I discovered that there is no worse punishment than living with shame for things you didn't do. One day while I was in line at the market, an elderly woman I knew by sight approached me. She looked at me with moist eyes and said in a low voice, "Mr. Thomas, I saw what was in the local news, and I just wanted to tell you that I admire your courage. I also have a son who kicked me out of my house, but I didn't have the courage you did." I looked at her, took her hand, and said, It's not courage, ma'am, it's necessity. When the soul can't take it anymore, you have to do something, even if it hurts. That conversation marked me because I understood that I wasn't the only one, that there were many old folks like me, silenced, humiliated, displaced, who kept quiet out of love, fear, or shame. And I decided that no matter what happened, I would not be silent again. A few days later, my lawyer called with an update. He told me the prosecution now had enough evidence to formalize the charges, that the initial hearing would be in 2 weeks. I asked him if Ryan could go to jail, and he said, "It's possible, but that will depend on the judge. We only present the truth." That night, I slept little, not out of fear, but from the certainty that what had started as a defense was now an open war. And although I didn't want to hurt, I wasn't going to surrender either. The days passed, the city kept its rhythm, the cars, the church bells, the bread sellers. At dawn, everything seemed normal. But inside me, every day was a battle. It hurt to see old photos. It hurt to pass by places where we used to go as a family. It hurt to hear the silence of my grandchildren, who didn't understand what was happening. But I also knew that pain was no excuse to give up, that this wound would only heal with truth and justice. The day of the hearing arrived. I put on my best shirt, the one with white buttons, and combed my hair carefully. I arrived early. The room was cold, with wooden benches and a young, serious-faced female judge. Ryan was there with his lawyer. He didn't look at me, and I didn't look at him. We each sat on our own side. The judge began to read the file. She mentioned the charges: attempted fraud, forgery of a signature, identity theft, misuse of banking documents. I felt each word was like a stone falling to the ground. After presenting the facts, the judge gave me the floor. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but not my voice. And I spoke not as a betrayed father, not as a victim, but as a man who decided late in life to stand up for himself. I said, "Your Honor, I did not come here to ask for punishment. I came to ask for my dignity back. For years they called me useless. They treated me like a nuisance, and still I continued to give everything. But when they stole my respect, I knew I could no longer be silent. My son is not here because of how I feel. He is here because of what he did." The room fell silent. And in that silence I felt something inside me settle, as if finally, after so long, something was back in its place. The hearing ended. The judge did not pass sentence that day, but she made it clear that there was merit to continue the process. Ryan left with his head down. I left in peace. That night I returned to my house. I made a coffee as always. I sat on the patio, and for the first time I felt that I was no longer an old man fighting his shadow. I felt that I was a man who had been a father, a worker, a husband, and who was now also his own master. But the most surprising part was yet to come. A few days after the hearing, the city continued its usual rhythm. But inside me, everything had changed. I left that courthouse with a feeling that's hard to explain. It wasn't joy. It wasn't sadness. It was something in between, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. But at the same time, a void had been left. Because deep down, every father holds on to the hope, no matter how small, that his son will one day return. Ask for forgiveness for real. Acknowledge his mistake. But that day when I saw Ryan with that cold look, without saying a single word, without even raising his eyes to look at me, I understood that he had already chosen his path. And finally, I had also chosen mine. At the end of that same week, I received a visit I didn't expect. It was Mason Ryan's eldest son. He's a grown man now. He must be about 22, 23. But I still remember him running barefoot through the yard, climbing the trees in the orchard, asking me for stories before bed. Grandpa, tell me another one about the countryside, the one about when you met Grandma Lucy. When I opened the door and saw him standing there with a backpack on his shoulder and moist eyes, I froze. Not because I was surprised to see him, but because in his gaze I saw something I hadn't seen in that family for years. Truth. "Can I come in, Grandpa?" he asked with a soft voice as if every word pained him. I opened the door without saying anything. He sat in the same wooden chair where his father had sat weeks before, but the energy was different. "Sorry for coming without notice, but I needed to see you. Mom doesn't know I'm here. And Dad, if he finds out, he'll explode, but I don't care." I let him talk. I didn't interrupt him because sometimes a young soul needs to vent without barriers. "I saw everything, Grandpa. I read the papers. I saw the emails. I listened to the recordings your lawyer submitted. I don't want to justify my dad because what he did has no justification. I just want you to know that not all of us think like him, that I never saw you as a useless old man. On the contrary, you were the only one who spoke the truth to me in this family." I felt a lump in my throat. I swallowed my tears, but my voice broke a little when I said, "Thank you, son. Those words are worth more than all the gold your father tried to steal." Mason told me that he hadn't been getting along with his parents for a while, that he had tried to talk to stop their decisions, to bring some sense into it. But every time he did, they silenced him. They treated him like a traitor for having a heart. He told me he had argued with his father about what happened at the hearing, that he even threatened to leave home if they continued with that absurd lawsuit. As I listened in my mind, the image of the boy I cared for when Ryan had no time came flooding back. The afternoons I took him to the workshop, when I taught him how to use a hammer, when I explained how to plant a seed, all of it came back at once. And I understood that although I had lost a son, I hadn't lost everything. Mason hugged me before he left. He said he wanted to come more often, that he didn't want me to feel alone, that if I ever decided to leave this city, he wanted to go with me. I smiled, put my hand on his shoulder, and told him, "You will always have a place wherever I am, my boy, always." That night I slept differently, not lighter, but more accompanied, because the heart, when it breaks, also opens, and sometimes that's where the light gets in. But the story didn't stop there. A few days later, my lawyer called with news. He told me that Ryan had tried to reach an out-of-court settlement, that he had sent a letter signed by his own hand, admitting to the forgery, asking for the process to be suspended in exchange for my complete silence. They wanted to cover it all up. They wanted me to shut up, not to appear in the press, not to talk to the family. I asked the lawyer to send me a copy of that letter, and I read it calmly. It was elegant, well-written, full of justifications like a bad moment, financial pressure, bad advice, excess of confidence. But not a single word said, "I'm sorry, Dad," not one. And there I understood that the only thing Ryan wanted to save was his own name, not mine, not our relationship, not the truth. I told the lawyer I do not accept. Let the process continue. If he ever wants to talk to me, let him come as a son, not as a negotiator. The lawyer was silent for a few seconds, and then said, "You have more courage than most men I know, Mr. Miller." It's not courage, I thought. It's exhaustion. It's pain. It's dignity. That same week, the local press began to talk about the case, not with names, not with details, but with phrases that everyone recognized. Senior citizen legally defends his home against family fraud attempt. Some neighbors came to see me, some to applaud me, others to tell me I should just keep quiet, and others simply to tell me their own stories, widows evicted by their children, men sent to nursing homes by ambitious daughters, in-law grandparents who raised grandchildren, and today don't even know where they are. And I thought maybe all this I'm going through isn't just for me. Maybe this pain needs to be told, not for revenge, but to awaken others. But the most unexpected thing was still to come, because after everything, after the hearing, the letter, the silence, and the betrayal, someone appeared whom I never thought I would see again. And when that person knocked on my door, I understood that sometimes life holds one last card, one that nobody sees coming. I was sitting on the patio as I did every afternoon having my coffee and bread when someone knocked on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I thought maybe it was Mason again, or a curious neighbor wanting to know about all the town gossip. But when I opened the door, I was stunned. It was her Alice, my daughter-in-law, Ryan's wife, the same one who was behind the forged papers, the one who filled my son's head with poisonous ideas, the one who looked at me as if I were an old plant cluttering up the living room. I never imagined seeing her standing in front of me alone without makeup, without jewelry, with her eyes downcast, and a purse hanging from her shoulder. "Can I talk to you, Mr. Miller?" she said in a small voice, almost trembling. I looked at her for a few seconds. I thought about slamming the door in her face. I thought about telling her everything I had held back for years. But something in her gaze, something in the way she clung to the strap of that purse, as if it were the only thing she had left, made me step aside. And without a word, I pointed to the chair on the porch. She sat down slowly. She didn't look me in the eyes. She fidgeted with her fingers. She took deep breaths as if she wanted to speak. But she couldn't find a way to start. "I know I don't deserve for you to listen to me," she finally said. "I know I was unfair, harsh, that I never gave you your place. And I also know that what we did with Ryan is unforgivable." I didn't say anything. I just watched her. I waited. "I came because I can't take it anymore," she continued. "Ryan is out of his mind. He yells all the time, he slams doors, he blames everyone. He says you ruined his life. But I know it was him who crossed the line. I signed those papers because he asked me to. He demanded it. He told me it was just a formality, that everything would still be yours, that it was just to get things in order. And I, like a fool, believed him." "And just for that you signed in my name?" I finally asked. "To get things in order?" "No," she said, lowering her head even more. "I also did it out of fear. Because if I refused, he would yell at me. He would threaten me. He'd say I had no right to an opinion. And over time I realized I had become an accomplice, not just to the scam, but to his contempt for you." The silence grew thick between us. The sun was beginning to set behind the trees, and the song of the birds filled the gaps where we didn't know what to say. "And what do you want now?" I asked calmly. "Are you here to ask me to drop the complaint?" "No," she answered immediately, tears in her eyes. "I'm not here for that. I'm here to tell you that I'm leaving. I'm leaving the house. I can't keep living with a man who is capable of doing that to his own father, especially after what he did to the children." "To the children?" I asked, worried. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "Ryan started treating them with the same harshness, yelling at them, insulting them if they mentioned my name. Mason tried to protect his siblings, but he couldn't handle it all. And me, I realized that if I didn't leave now, my children would grow up hating, like him." I remained silent, not because I didn't know what to say, but because in my heart there was such a strong mix of sadness, relief, and compassion that any word would have come out twisted. "I just wanted you to know the truth," she said, getting up. "And also that if you ever want to see the kids, they miss you. A lot. They don't tell you because they're scared, but they ask about you." She took her bag and took a step towards the door. I stayed seated looking at the horizon, and just as she was about to cross the threshold, I said without looking at her, "Alice, if you leave, don't look back, but don't come back empty-handed either. Take what you've learned, because if we don't learn, we just repeat." She stopped. She nodded. And she left in silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about everything. About Ryan. How we got to this point. About Mason. About the children. About Lucy, who was surely turning in her grave in heaven watching all of this. And above all, I thought about myself. About the man I had been. The one I was now. And what I had left to do. The next morning, I decided it was time to move. I went to the bank, I organized my accounts. Then I stopped by the lawyer's office. I wanted to leave everything settled, nothing halfway. Because I learned that the greatest gift you can give yourself when you get old is to owe nothing to anyone. When I left, I passed by the school where my grandchildren study. I stayed across the street, watching from a distance. I saw them come out with their backpacks, talking among themselves. Mason was waiting for them at the corner. When he saw me, he crossed the street. He gave me a strong hug, the kind that doesn't need words. And just by looking at me, I knew he knew what had happened. "Thanks for everything, Grandpa," he said, "for not staying silent, for teaching me that being a man isn't about yelling the loudest, but about living with truth." And there, standing on that corner, I understood that sometimes to save the future, you have to let the past fall. Even if it hurts. Even if it bleeds. But what I didn't know yet was that the trial still had one last twist. Something that neither Ryan nor I nor anyone expected. And when it came, it changed the course of the entire story. Just when you think you've seen it all, that it has hurt enough, that the worst words have been said, and that the wound can't open any wider. Life shows you that there are still layers to tear away. I thought the trial was on track, that now it was just a matter of time, of papers, hearings, lawyers, and judges doing their part. But what nobody imagined, not me, not my lawyer, not the prosecution, was what Ryan was going to do. It was 3 days before the next hearing, the one where all the evidence from the bank was to be presented, the forged documents, the technical signature reports, the witnesses from the notary, and the digital forensics. Everything was in order. We were ready. Until my lawyer called me one night with the most serious voice I had heard since this all began. "Mr. Miller, your son has filed a countersuit." I was silent. I didn't understand. A countersuit for what? On what grounds? "He claims you are senile, that you are not mentally fit to make legal decisions for yourself, that this whole process has been manipulated by third parties, and that the original complaint should be dismissed." I felt the blood drain from my face. I leaned on the table. My hand was shaking, not from fear, from rage, from disbelief. My own son, after trying to rob me, forging documents, using his wife, now he wanted to make me out to be crazy, incompetent. "Can he do that?" I asked in a low voice. "Anyone can claim whatever they want. The judge will decide whether to admit the countersuit or not. But what it does mean is that you will have to undergo an official psychiatric evaluation, court-ordered." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of Lucy's portrait. I spoke to her as if she were there. I told her everything, with tears in my eyes. "Do you see what your son has become, my love? Do you see how far he can go?" And as I spoke to her, I remembered the years we took him to school together, the times we waited for him with a hot lunch, the days we comforted him over a failed exam. Where did that boy break? Where did we lose him? The next day, I presented myself at the courthouse as the judge requested. Mason accompanied me. We went into a small office with a psychologist and a doctor. They asked me basic questions first. Full name, age, address, current year, the president's name. Then more complex things. What day of the week it was. What certain proverbs meant. How to solve certain dilemmas. I answered everything calmly, clearly. Because although I am 73 years old, my mind is sharper than many young people's today. Then came the emotional part. They asked about my childhood, about Lucy, about my children, about my grandchildren. And there, yes, my voice broke a little. Not from weakness, but from truth. Because you can fake many things in life, but not the pain when they ask about those you loved, who turned their backs on you. After the evaluation, the psychologist looked at me with tenderness. She offered me a glass of water and said, "Thank you for your sincerity, Mr. Miller. It's clear you have lived a lot, but you are still yourself in every word." I thanked her with a nod, and I walked out of there with my head held high. A week later, the official report arrived. The prosecutor's office called to inform me. Cognitive capacity intact, coherent emotional state, completely favorable evaluation. They gave me a sealed copy, and that same afternoon, my lawyer presented the document as evidence against the countersuit. Ryan was disarmed. And yet something inside me no longer celebrated these victories as before, because every step we took forward was one step further from any reconciliation. Not because I didn't want it, but because he had already burned all the bridges. The days passed. The hearing was rescheduled. This time it would be public. Anyone could be present. And so it was. The courtroom was more crowded than ever. There were neighbors, journalists, even old family friends. I arrived early in my usual white shirt, the one Lucy used to iron for me with love. Mason accompanied me as he had throughout the process. He took my arm as we entered, and he whispered in my ear, "You're not alone, Grandpa. I'm with you." Ryan arrived later, dressed in a suit, alone. Without his wife, without his children. He didn't look at me. He sat on the other side with a lost gaze. The judge called for silence, and they began to read the file. The evidence was clear. The fraudulent bank access attempt, the forged form, the expert analyzed signature, Alice's confession, Mason's testimony. And now the countersuit dismissed for lack of merit. Every word from the prosecutor was like a stone on Ryan's back. And then something happened that no one expected. The judge, after reviewing everything, addressed Ryan directly. "Mr. Ryan Miller, given the evidence presented, this court can proceed to charge you with attempted fraud, forgery of a private document, and manipulation of bank data. But before deciding, I will give you the floor. Do you have anything to say?" There was a tense silence in the room. Everyone looked at Ryan. He swallowed hard. He stood up slowly. He looked at the judge, and then he turned his head towards me. And for the first time in the entire trial, he looked at me. His voice came out trembling but clear. "I don't know how we got here. I only know that I caused all of this. Not because I lacked love, but because I had too much pride. I wanted to have everything, to control everything. I let greed get the better of me, and I lost the most valuable thing, my father." The entire room fell silent, and inside I felt a knot. Not of reconciliation, not of relief, but of a pain that was finally surfacing. But words were no longer enough. What is broken by actions is not healed by speeches. And while everyone waited for what the judge would say, I knew that my decision was already made. As Ryan spoke in that room full of eyes, cameras, and hushed murmurs, my heart didn't soften, but it did open. Because what he said, though late though incomplete, was the first truth that had come out of his mouth in many years. I had too much pride. Those words stuck in my head, bouncing like rusty bells. Yes, son, you had too much pride. And you lacked memory. You forgot who taught you to walk, who held you when you had a fever, who went without food so you could eat. But now it was no longer time to talk about all that was missing. It was time to finish what I started. The judge called for silence. He acknowledged the statement, and he clarified that it did not change the legal course of the facts. Then he took a few seconds. He looked at the documents. He turned the pages. And with the same calm with which life-altering sentences are signed, he said in a firm voice, "This court finds that there is sufficient evidence to refer this case to a formal criminal trial, and furthermore, considers it appropriate to issue precautionary measures against Mr. Ryan Miller for the crimes of signature forgery, attempted fraud, and obstruction of justice." The room murmured. Ryan's lawyer put his hand on his forehead, and I remained still. I didn't smile. I didn't lower my head. I didn't close my eyes. I just breathed, like someone who gets air again after years underwater. Ryan was released pending the formal trial, but with restrictions. He couldn't come near me, my house, or my accounts. He had to surrender his passport. He had to sign in at the courthouse every week. And for the first time in his life, he was no longer untouchable. When I left the courthouse, I ran into several neighbors at the door. Some patted me on the back. Others just looked on with respect. A woman approached me, hugged me, and said, "My dad didn't have your strength, Mr. Thomas. They kicked him out of his house and he died alone. But you got justice." And I, in a low voice, replied, "Not for me, for those who will come after, so it doesn't happen again." Mason was waiting for me at the corner. He hugged me tight. His eyes were red. He said, "You know what hurts the most, Grandpa? That Dad had the chance to stop this. He had the option to get off the train, and he didn't want to." And I replied, "Because sometimes, son, there are people who love being right more than they love having peace." That afternoon, we went back home, the house that was still mine, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but out of justice. I sat on the patio. Mason went to make coffee, and while I waited for him, I closed my eyes. I listened to the wind in the trees. I felt Lucy's voice inside me, not as a memory, but as a strength. "Don't forget who you are, Thomas. Don't forget what you're worth." And then I knew there was something else I had to do. The next day, I went to the lawyer's office. I requested an urgent appointment. The notary, an older gentleman who had known me since I was young, received me with a smile. I explained what I wanted. I want to change my will. But not just that, I want to leave something in writing that is not just legal but moral. And there, in that office that smelled of wood and ink, I dictated a public letter, a testament of words, ideas, truths, not to accuse but to make clear what I had learned. The letter went something like this. If you are reading this, you probably already know what happened. I am not writing to expose anyone. I am writing so that never again will a grandfather have to be silent, so that no father has to choose between love and dignity. I was betrayed by the one I loved most, but I did not respond with hatred. I responded with justice because love without respect is just habit, and respect without truth is just a facade. To my grandchildren, I leave my good name, and to whoever wants to listen, I leave this message. It is never too late to stand up. The notary looked at me in silence. He asked for permission to sign it as a witness as well. "These words should not be kept in a drawer," he told me, and I nodded. Then I passed by the children's school. I asked if I could leave an envelope with some handwritten letters. They were for each of my grandchildren without reproaches, just affection, stories, memories, and a promise. I will be here. When you want to look your grandfather in the eyes again, I will be here. That night, as the sky turned orange, Mason helped me water the plants. He looked at me and said, "You know, Grandpa, what you're doing. It's not just for you, it's for all of us, for me, for those who come after. You're not just changing your story, you're changing the way we see what a real man is." I didn't know what to answer. I just passed him the watering can, smiled, and thought that perhaps the greatest legacy one leaves is not in the inheritance, nor in the properties, nor in the last names. It is in the example, in the decisions made when it hurts the most. But what not even Mason knew was that I still had one last card to play, a decision I had made in silence, one that was not against Ryan nor against anyone. It was for me. And when I made it, I knew that finally I was going to close the circle. That morning I woke up earlier than usual. I made the coffee, calmly adding a little cinnamon like Lucy liked it. I sat at the table and took the envelope I had stored months ago from the old wooden box. Inside was the final document I had signed at the notary's office. It wasn't a common will, not just inheritance papers. It was a decision. One that I had pondered for many nights, staring at the ceiling, listening to the crickets, remembering everything I lived through, what I lost, what I gained. That paper in my hand said something clear, strong, and definitive. I bequeath my assets, my house, and my savings. But not to my children, nor to those who carry my last name, but to those who carried my name with respect. I went to the desk, opened the second drawer, and took out the name I had put down as the main heir. Mason, my grandson. The only one who didn't look away. The only one who hugged me without conditions. The only one who defended me even when everyone else called him a traitor. I left everything to him. But more than the papers, I left him a legacy. To never bow your head to injustice, even when that injustice comes disguised as family. I signed the final document with a steady hand. I didn't tremble, I didn't hesitate, because I understood that blood isn't everything. What makes you family is loyalty. That same afternoon, Mason came to visit. He didn't know anything yet. He brought sweet bread and orange juice. He sat across from me as he did every afternoon with that calm that few young people have today. I spoke to him directly. I told him that everything I had built in my life no longer had value if it was going to end up in the hands of someone who trampled on me. I told him that when I left home at 17 with a shovel on my shoulder and empty pockets, the only thing I had was dignity. And that now at 73, that was still the only thing that truly belonged to me. Mason didn't say anything for a few seconds. His eyes filled with tears. He hugged me. Tight. He cried in silence like men who know the cost of walking with a clean heart cry. The days passed. The news got out. Like everything in a small town, it didn't take long. Some looked at me with admiration, others with pity, a few with anger. They told me it was too harsh. How could I leave a son out of the will? And I gave the same answer to everyone. He who left me out of his respect cannot be in my final decisions. It wasn't about revenge, nor pride. It was about balance, about closing a story with justice, about showing that being old is not the same as being a fool, and that love does not obligate you to give everything to the one who shouts the loudest. Ryan never spoke to me again. Not a call, not a letter, nothing. His criminal trial was still ongoing, and I no longer followed it with resentment, only with distance. They asked me if I planned to forgive him, and I said forgiveness doesn't always mean hugging again. Sometimes forgiving is letting go forever. And so I did. I let go. I let him go from my life. And I stopped waiting for something that was never going to come. Because some words are said too late. And some hugs, if they don't arrive on time, are no longer needed. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mason became stronger than ever. He came every day. He helped me with the plants, with the paperwork, with errands. But more than that, he listened to me. He let me talk for hours. He asked about my childhood, about the old days, about Lucy, about the things I learned. And I understood that this was the most valuable thing I had left. The ability to tell my story to someone who truly wanted to hear it. Not to judge, not to correct me, just to honor me. One afternoon, Mason brought me a notebook. "I want you to write everything down, Grandpa," he said. "Not just what happened with Dad. Everything. Your life, your battles, your story." And so I began. To write with a slow but steady hand, page by page, filling that notebook with my voice, not to publish it, not to become famous, but so that when I am no longer here, there will be someone who remembers who I was, what I did not allow, and why. And as I wrote those pages, I understood something. That I was not defeated. That I did not end up bitter. That I did not die while I was alive, as many thought. On the contrary, at an age when many give up, I was reborn. Because I decided to defend myself. Because I chose to live with my head held high. Because I understood that self-love is not selfishness. It is justice. And now, if you are listening to this story, I ask only one thing of you. Do not be silent if they push you aside. Do not hide if they call you a burden. Do not allow the title of dad or mom or grandpa to be used to step on you. You are worthy. You deserve respect. And if this story touched your heart, I want you to tell me, what would you have done in my place?